Hello and happy Monday. Welcome to another luncheon or Money Monday with Purse Strings. Today we are talking about empowering caregivers and kind of figuring out those finances for the caregivers for your and for the person you are caring for. So it's going to be a great conversation today, very important. And for those who are new here, Purse Strings comes to this group every week to give tips, tricks, pieces of advice on how to be financially fearless. And we bring on our Purse Strings approved professionals. Those are professionals who are part of our Purse Strings network who are love to serve the female market, want to help women really succeed in their finances. And we have one of our Purse Strings approved professionals right here with us today to talk about empowered caregiving. And so we're so excited that you're on. And so do you want to give a little intro of who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Jeannie Dougherty. I am a money expert for folks who want to make a career change so they can cross that financial bridge to their dream life. I also work with small business owners, and I've had previous experience being a caregiver for both of my parents. And I understand the personal impact as well as the financial impact when it comes to caring for a loved one.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to have you on today, especially to share your expertise. Whenever I hear your name, it's always like, Jeannie, the money expert, like you do on your TikToks. So if you haven't seen her on TikTok, go check it out because that's like what goes through my head. So it's working.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would love to kind of start with do you want to tell a little bit what you're comfortable with about your own situation of caregiving and kind of, because I know you had to care for both your parents.
Yeah. So both my parents suffered with Alzheimer's for a number of years, and then they eventually passed. And so to speak about it personally it was quite a shift. My parents were not old, but both of my parents passed away when I was still pretty young. They both were diagnosed fairly young with Alzheimer's. And why did that happen? Hard to say. It's just one of those things that just did occur. And it was unlikely that both my parents would have gotten it, but here I am. They both got it. And by the way, there was no previous history of Alzheimer's on either side of the family. So it is kind of that anomaly. So I can really understand what it's like when you have to financially move in a different direction of looking at all the resources to make sure your loved ones are taken care of, but also looking at the resources to take care of you. Yeah. Many caregivers push back when it's like, did you go to your medical appointments? Did you go to your therapy? Did you, talk to a financial advisor about what you can do next with your money? And a lot of times people are like, I'm just trying to keep up with all the medical appointments, or I'm just trying to keep this person not moving so I can just stay still, because, caregiving with somebody can be exhausting. And particularly with Alzheimer's, the later stages, both my parents had what's known as sundowning, which means that they would stay up at night because they had no idea it was night.
Oh, it's so hard.
Yeah. So, So talk about, being exhausted, and it's totally different than when you have a newborn who doesn't sleep. It's totally different. And because that's what people don't always understand. The biggest thing I would say, though, financially, what was a challenge, because as a daughter, I have siblings, and then I also had step-parents. So I had to deal with things in a different way versus, say, being the spouse. So when I would ask questions, I realized a lot of times my step-parents didn't have answers because they didn't know, they didn't think of that. They didn't have the time and the energy to do the resources. So one of the first free tips I recommend for family members is that if you've got somebody who's like keen on looking at treatment, or they're keen at looking at all the residential possibilities if it's that time. Or if there's somebody who's interested in interviewing caregivers, if you need that so that you can leave and do something when you get out of the house. Like, I don't know, maybe, go to your own dental appointment, maybe get your hair done, maybe go to the grocery store if you don't want everything brought in by Amazon because you just want to get out of the house. Those are examples of it. But if you have somebody who's what I would say the numbers person who's pretty good with the finances, then that's really important that they take over not only just with basic bill paying, but also taking a look at how long can the money last and when do you make changes?
Yeah.
What happens in my experience, even just working with other families that go through this, is that they have the home. Usually it's paid off or it's very low mortgage.
Right.
And they have a doctor, and they don't really want to upset the person in the early stages, because if they have memory and they know where to go in the house, then you're less likely to see a decline in the person. So putting somebody in home in an actual care facility, it can be a lot of money. And a lot of times people do not have the funds to put themselves in a particular place or anything like that. So it will be out of pocket, and insurance will only cover so much for so long if you happen to have those benefits. So this is where creativity can be helpful, but this is also just, being somebody who's like, hey, if I'm watching my parents go through this, how would I like to prepare myself? Contacting a financial advisor, looking at ways outside of long-term healthcare insurance, which is still an interesting market. It's growing, but the premiums, it's getting more and more expensive. It's just something you have to be aware of. There's other ways that you can strategize and put money aside in case you might need more care for yourself individually. And then there's things like reverse mortgages, which some people get really upset about because the house is supposed to be an asset that would go to the family. But what a lot of people don't understand is that most states will ask you to liquidate all your resources until you can get inside a care home if it's going to go through the Medicaid route. So there's a lot of things that you've got to think about. And sometimes it's assigning people to do different things. In my family, that's what we tried to do. In both cases with my parents, it got a little bit better in some areas and it didn't get better in others. So we had some issues with control, which is very normal. That's why you consider maybe getting a family counselor to help with things.
There's so many great points that you've listed right there. I mean, the reverse mortgage is a great option. And to me, that's one of those things. It's like, do you want to pay for the care and receive the house? Or do you not want to receive the house, but you also don't have to pay for the care? Something's got to give. But then it's also trying to figure out how you can delegate some of these tasks. Because someone has if they're really smart, but maybe can't help you physically, like they could do some of that research for you, or those other things that it's not as draining. But like you're saying, it's not like a small baby that you brought home. I mean, it's usually 100-pound person, that you got to kind of help and carry and diaper, whatever situation you may be in caregiving. It's not just, a cute little baby that is going to kind of grow out of this. If anything, chances are it's only going to get worse.
Right.
And so what kind of like financial impact should people be aware of when, of caregiving?
Yeah. So, what happens sometimes, and most of the time caregiving goes to the adult daughter, maybe the oldest, sometimes it's the youngest, it depends. That's most of the time where the caregiving goes. And as you know, we don't always make top money. We're I think 92 cents of the dollar compared to men. That's not in all cases, but that's roughly where women are across, the US. And it's kind of expected that women were going to pick up and still take care of their own families and take care of their parents. And, what I try to remind people is that, 50 to 75 years ago, when we had much larger families, you could just move into mom's house, or you could have mom come to your house, and then you would have siblings in the neighborhood and you would take turns. Sure, you could have done it like that. But things are way more complex in terms of medical care. Things are way more complex in terms of driving and getting on the road, and also we live longer. So, if you're in your 60s trying to take care of your 90-year-old parents, it does occasionally happen that the 60-year-old does pass away. So you got to have more resources and more ideas put in place. The other thing is that I feel like caregivers need support with just basic visiting. Like I mean, one of the things that happens when you're caregiving, you're there around this person as much as you can. So having friends come over and being flexible with, what's going on, but also being involved. Like I brought some pizza, or, if they're vegetarians and they don't want to do pizza, whatever, then you bring something that they would like. With both my parents, they loved sweets, and it was okay for the doctors to give them sweets because it didn't matter at this point. Like their teeth are fine. They wouldn't give it to them. They weren't diabetic, so that wasn't a worry or a concern. So, that's what made my family happy. Both my parents is to eat like cookies and chocolate, not every second of every day, but, like, oh, do you want this? And then they'd be like, oh, this is great. And then they would maybe interact, and then they would move on with their day. So it's learning to figure things like that out. A lot of times when somebody's sick, we stay away. And so people feel more isolated. So I highly recommend that. Visiting people. Sometimes people just want to do a FaceTime conversation because they're just too exhausted. The house is a mess. They won't do that. I have seen it in certain families. I highly recommend this, is that if they're not really great at cleaning, if you can't personally go over and clean the place,
Yeah.
then send somebody. Pay for a house cleaner. Man, that can save people a lot of grief and frustration trying to keep the house up and then trying to do other things. It's the same thing with getting the lawn mowed.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with getting the house painted or something, normal upkeep, which we would do. But if you're exhausted, you're not going to have time or energy for that.
I'll never forget, like, trying to take care of my grandpa. Like, once a month we would take him out to lunch and the cleaning person would come in that hour, just so he didn't know about, he didn't know about it and he was out of the house. But also, they did have a lot of siblings. So that was, Tuesday you call, Wednesday you call, Thursday you call. So we always had somebody to talk to every day.
Exactly.
And kind of expect that. And then it was kind of like, that was the check-in, to make sure things are good in this 24-hour period.
Yeah.
And that way you can kind of disperse and delegate. And I think a lot of people on the sidelines want to help and don't always know how. So giving them that direction, I think they would love, versus just thinking you're a hindrance.
Yeah.
They would love to support you. You just kind of got to give them a little bit of direction sometimes.
Yeah. And one of the other things that happens in caregiving when you have larger people involved is that the caregiver does not always notice the subtle changes. But if you have a sibling that comes in and comes back out, like say, a couple months later, they're going to be like, oh man, this is totally different. And
Right.
That's really important. It's not a failing on the caregiver. And a lot of times caregivers, I've seen that really take it personally, like somehow they failed. And it's like, no, because of the caregiving and the nature of a disease, the person may shift or change. And so that's good if somebody notices it. Maybe that's when you do the follow-up with the doctor. Maybe you just give the information to the doctor.
Right.
But that happens more often than I see it. And people are like, I didn't even notice. And it's like, yeah, because every day
so close.
Yeah, very close.
Yeah.
You just kind of deal with one fire to the next fire to the next fire. You don't pay attention to that.
So what are some free resources of financial information or tools that caregivers can kind of use?
So the two biggest ones that I love are AARP. They've got tons of free stuff. Even like you just want to get on their YouTube channel, you can just follow stuff. And then there's the Area on Aging Resources. I'm sorry. Yeah, that one. There's one in every state. I probably screwed up the name, but they are fantastic. They've got, like, if you need a resource, it's going to be within their network. They're going to know. Where a lot of people don't always have the time and the energy is to go do the resources and do the double checking.
Yeah.
What I always recommend, this may not be always a free assessment, but it's one of the better ones, you can get a free referral if you don't know. Most people are working. And so you can go through your employee assistance network and ask for an elder care assessment person, a professional. And so it's usually a nurse or a social worker that can come out to the house and they can take a look at the person and go, here's the list of services you might want to consider in the next year.
Yeah.
That can save you so much time and energy and grief. It's great if you're present. If you can't be present, be available by phone, or video if that's necessary, because that can help you tremendously.
Yeah.
The other thing is that it's the whole point of, aging is that hopefully you'll have these conversations before the person gets ill.
Yep.
Because when they get ill, then it's looking more at, what medically must be done. But if people are, you're right, I didn't think about, do you want to pass away at home? Do you want to be around your loved ones when it's that time? You may not always get that luxury, but if that's what you want, then you know how to aim for the care, and then asking for the support if you're not feeling well or you're not doing well. Mm-hmm.
Those are all great pieces of advice. And I think the only one I would add on there is, if you need some resources, don't be afraid to talk to your financial professional, because they talk to so many people. And it's interesting just to see, just sharing some information with people who are close to you, who, are, supportive and have good referrals. It's amazing who you know. And it's like, you're not always looking for someone who specializes with Alzheimer's, but all of a sudden, once that hits, they might know somebody. They didn't suggest it because you never needed it. But now that you do, they might have somebody for you.
Absolutely.
So take advantage of those resources out there, because your financial professional can help you with so many different things. And I know you guys are just a wealth of knowledge and resources around.
Right. And a lot of times I think, as financial professionals, we are really dealing not just with the money piece,
Yeah.
but how the emotions interact with the money. If you are a server of a type of a person, then you don't want to spend money on yourself because you keep thinking you're going to need it. And
Yeah.
that's why it's good to have something like an elder care assessment who can say, hey, let's look at the resources that you need this year. And then let's talk about making sure you have the resources for next few years. Because when people are tight-fisted, oh, I don't want any money spent on me. I don't want any money spent on me. Then it's like, uh-oh. But then the fear is that a lot of people are like, if I spend all the money, then, oh no, I won't have anything left for care. And it's
Of
like, there
course.
is a medium.
Yeah.
There's a way to get to the middle of this.
Yeah, you just have to have these conversations and be open because you don't always know what you need. And that's the hard thing about caregiving is you don't know when it's going to end or when it's going to start, which is always, a difficult kind of balance. But that's why you have professionals who have done these things, who have had this experience. It's not their first rodeo, to really support you in that journey.
Yeah. The other piece that I would say that seems to sometimes get lost, we don't talk about this enough. It's not a pretty one, but there is about at least 30% of all families dealing with caregiving. There is some level of financial exploitation, and it's usually the family members themselves, which is why it's hopefully helpful that people have these conversations before somebody gets sick. And
Yeah.
also understanding that money is not always going to be distributed equally. Gosh, it just isn't in families for all kinds of family dynamic reasons that none of us can control. But if there is money set aside for quote unquote person's care, then that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I knew in one particular family, they had a lot of problems with addiction with one of the children, and that person did not get an inheritance because they had mom and dad giving the person money throughout their lifetime, and it was decided that was it.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that person didn't know until after, the family member passed away, which was its own, own problem. But,
Right.
If that's what it's going to be, then that needs to be the decision.
Yeah. And I think it's just really important to have these conversations, to be upfront about them. And, we were talking early in the month, try to have these conversations when your parents still seem young and able, because I know so many people who seem that way and then they just start losing their memory. And so it becomes, how do we get this information out of you fast enough? To gather it and to, bring your accounts together, because you just weren't planning on something happening so soon.
Yeah.
And it's hard. I'm not saying it's not, but it's a conversation that's essential to have. And as a caregiver, you want to be able to help that person live their legacy and live their best days through whatever that looks like to them. And so you need to know what that looks like to them.
Exactly. And then, here's the thing, there are resources and, of sitting down, like, how do you have this conversation? I don't want to be morbid. I don't want to be difficult. I don't want to be, nasty or anything. But really, sometimes the best way to have the conversation is like, how long do you think you're going to live? And where do you think you're going to be? Meaning, do you still want to be in this house or are you just going to move?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times we were like, I'm moving to Florida. And you're like, okay, hurricane season. What are you going to do? Because, a lot
Am
of
I
people,
flying down there?
yeah. I mean, a lot of people are losing their homes after, the hurricanes because it gets flooded and I don't know.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to put out our family emergency binder. If anyone hasn't downloaded it, just because it's a good way to start the conversation. Hey, I got this. I'm updating my will. Where is your will? Do you know?
Yeah.
Just to kind of prompt the conversation. We kept saying, somebody else said, curiosity, not judgment.
Yes.
Which is really the kind of the way you want to go in there and have these conversations because, otherwise you just won't know.
Yeah. And it's great to have electronic copies, but it's also really critical to have the originals because the originals, in case there's ever an issue in court, people want to find the original. Don't give them a copy. Hopefully, there's an original with the attorney if one was created. But again, if your attorney passes away or they close up shop, where did it go? I don't know.
I don't know either.
Yeah.
But, and I actually heard this other story where somebody kept all the information on their work computer. And so when they passed, their partner couldn't get into their work computer because the work wouldn't allow it, which had all their finances.
Oh, no.
So keep it on your personal computer or on a hard drive or something.
Yeah. Or instructions on how to get a hold of it and figure it out so that you know exactly what it is. So you're not like, oh, no. Oh, no.
Oh, no. And then the last thing, and I know we touched on this a little bit, is talking about the financial support that caregivers need. And, what kind of financial support can we get these caregivers?
So I always recommend immediately as soon as you have a health challenge. So you could be well into your 30s or 40s and, unfortunately it could be cancer, it could be a heart disease, it could be multiple sclerosis. We could go on and on about any medical issue it could be. It doesn't all have to be Alzheimer's, but the minute that happens, I highly encourage people to schedule an appointment with their financial advisor just to see what their money looks like.
Yeah.
Because if there's going to be a deviation due to cancer or some other situation, then you got to know how to plan for your retirement and for your care. And it hopefully isn't a terrifying, conversation. But you and I both know some people are like, well, how much cash do I have in the bank? And it's like, no. We want to think a little bigger than that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's why you have a financial advisor. There's also ways of, preparing and planning for things that you need. That's why some people have the life insurance. That's why some people have, just depending on the medical insurance, it may cover quite a lot.
Right.
But then, if you need something like not everybody needs secondary insurance, but if you do need secondary insurance, it's like getting the Affleck, so to speak, so that you can have like cash coming in. So you're not like, oh, we have zero now. Now
Right.
we're really stressed. The other thing is that there's always a nonprofit, in my experience, whenever there's a medical disease. So it's whether it's cancer or multiple sclerosis, et cetera, et cetera. And if you can get tapped into those resources, even as a caregiver, you'd be amazed to find out. People are like, oh, yeah, you do it this way. You can call and get that fixed. I'll never forget, there was a breast cancer survivor support group. I'm over here in the Maryland, DC area. And there was a woman that she would come and she would give a talk and she goes, if your lights are being threatened to be turned off because you are going through cancer treatment, you call me. She's like, I will, raise hell to the electric company. So you still have your power because it's winter. You need power in the winter. And then she would be like, and if they don't like it, she's like, we'll just go to the media and, have them on blast. And then you'll get your services back and they'll suspend wanting to, take you out. And in terms of, cutting off your power. And I remember thinking like, that's actually a really smart advocacy thing. If you're all alone, you don't have any friends or family to do additional support.
Yeah.
Or if they are, they're away and they can only afford to do so much. So that's the smart thing.
I love it. It really seems like, talk to your financial professional, make a plan and be willing to kind of be open with those resources around you because so many people are out there to help. I think we all understand that this is going to be a big crisis. It is a big thing for people to carry emotionally, physically, financially. And so we're here to help. We just need to be a little proactive and jump in and be part of the conversation, kind of ask for that help, which is sometimes honestly the hardest part.
Yeah. I definitely recommend a financial check and figuring out your next steps because that can give you what I would call like a game plan. But then it's also taking a look at your own calendar and figuring out what are your next steps? What are you going to do to take care of you? Who do you need to call? What plans do you need to do? Because, it seems to me like people will plan vacations, like no problem. Right. And I think that's wonderful. It's great that we plan these things, but even your vacations, you may not be able to go on. So that's why you get trip insurance, right? So you got to think about things a little more in the big sense instead of just like, oh, I guess I got to go. Can't go to the doctors today. It's like, no, you got to plan a little differently.
You're very right. Very right. And then before we wrap up, will you tell us a little bit about how you could support anybody listening today, either with your money coaching or anything like that?
Yeah. So how I work is I work with what I call the winning money power in your money brain. What does that mean? Well, we're all actually born with it. And so what happens is a lot of times when we have a crisis or a problem, we focus only on the lack and the scarcity and the competition. So I help people, within less than 90 days, rewire their money brain so they can actually have the energy and the emotional and mental strength to make the financial decisions that are coming forward. So they are not always behind the 8 ball. And by the way, therapy does not always work because most therapists don't have a lot of money coaching experience. They don't really know themselves. It's truly its own specialty. So for somebody who has been a caregiver for both of her parents, gets it that you need to have a different brain, if you will, to make all these financial decisions. Otherwise, it's just not going to work.
Right. Awesome. Well, anyone could reach out to get more information about kind of that 90-day thing. The email's been going through the bottom. She's also one of our Purse Strings approved professionals. So you can check her out at pursestrings.co. But I appreciate you jumping on and sharing all this great information and being a caregiver. I know that's so hard to do, but you know, I really commend you for it. And you know, let's speak up. Let's have these conversations. Let's ask for help when we need it, and jump into our financial conversation. So everyone have a great Monday, and we'll not be here next week because it's Memorial Day, but we'll be here again soon. Talk to everyone
Alrighty.
later. Bye.
Bye.